In October 1974, the Avis family encountered a glowing blue light that followed their car through Aveley, Essex. At a sharp bend, they entered a dense green mist that caused the car's electronics to fail. The family felt cold and disoriented inside the mist and lost 3 hours with no memory of what happened. Later, under hypnosis, John Avis began describing being aboard a craft with humanoid beings who referenced Phobos, a moon of Mars. The case remains unexplained, with elements of missing time, strange mists, and alleged alien abduction. On Sunday, October the 24th, 1974, John and Elaine Avis, along with their 3 children, had spent the day at Elaine's parents' house in Harold Hill in Essex. John and Elaine's father travelled to a nearby school where they would pick up Elaine's sister Anne, who had to be collected after returning from a week's school trip to Belgium. They left the house at about 4:30 so that they could be there in time for the scheduled arrival time of 5 p.m. Due to some delays, however, Anne didn't actually arrive until about 9 o'clock. So once Anne had been picked up and taken home, the Avis family departed from Harold Hill at about 9:50 p.m, aiming to reach home in time for John to catch a television play that he'd been looking forward to seeing. The journey should have taken about 20 minutes, and 2 of the children had already fallen asleep in the back of the car. And when they were about 1 mile away from the town of Hornchurch, 10-year-old Kevin suddenly asked, "What's that light?" Which prompted the parents to glance out of the window, where they would see an oval-shaped blue iridescent light hanging above the houses to their left. Initially, they dismissed it as a helicopter, until it began moving in strange and unexpected ways. The light seemed to be mirroring their journey, maintaining a constant distance, and as they turned onto Park Farm Road, it shifted again, moving ahead of them at an angle. It was now approximately 10 past 10, and it's around this point that the family noticed how few other cars there were on the road. It was unusually quiet. Then at a sharp bend in the road, they saw it. A thick, green mist, unnaturally dense, banked high across the road. The radio crackled, then smoked. Lights began to fail and the car plunged into silence. The family said they must only have been inside the mist for a few seconds before they felt a jolt, like a car going over a humpback bridge, and then the mist was gone and everything seemed normal again. Except for the clock. A 20-minute drive had turned into 3 missing hours. Yet the car was only half a mile further along the same road. John claimed that after the mist had gone, he was on his own in the front of the car, which was now travelling along the side of some woodlands called White Post Woods. Elaine recalled reaching a point about a half a mile further on just after a small bridge at a different woodlands known as Running Water Woods. They had no idea how to explain this, no idea what had really happened, and so they just decided not to talk about it anymore. Now, I'm using 3 sources for this particular story. The first is the Flying Saucer Review, Volume 23, Number 6, from April of 1978. I'm also referencing the Burton Daily Mail of the 12th of May 1995 and the Burton Daily Mail of the 30th of June 1995 and the Kilmarnock Standard on the 18th of August 1978. And while the three newspaper articles do have interesting bits and pieces in them, it is of course the Flying Saucer Review that's an absolute goldmine of information here. And we can begin by looking at what the publication tells us about the route that was taken that night. So the Avis family's route followed a typical path from Harold Hill to Aveley, covering approximately 9 miles, and it should have taken about 22 minutes to drive it. The researchers at the time actually retraced this journey in 1977 and identified some landmarks along the way which will help us. Elaine recalled a bridge near the site of the Green Mist, and according to the researchers, the bridge served as a natural boundary between the Greater London borough of Havering and Essex's borough of Grays Thurrock, and at that point the name of the road changes to Romford Road here. The area surrounding the lanes is predominantly farmland with scattered barns and cottages and some gravel pits. Obviously, I'm looking at this in 2024, and we're talking the late 70s for the original case, so things will look a bit different. The researchers said the roads were unlit at night, except for a few lampposts along Aveley Road, including one near where the mist was reported. At the site of where the Green Mist hit, the road is approximately 30 feet wide, and on the left there are dense bushes that rise to about 12 feet, with rough pasture and gravel works behind them, and to the right there were scattered trees at about 20 feet tall, which gave way to ploughed fields behind them. Just before the point where John Avis's memory resumes, after the mist, high-tension electricity pylons cross the area, running north-east to south-west. Between the location of the mist and where John regained his awareness, there's a small row of houses on the left and a crossroads. The researchers called into a pub, which doesn't seem to be there anymore, on the Hackton Lane Park Farm Road bend, but the people there couldn't help them with their inquiries. It was the little bridge that I wanted to find, because it seemed to be a key point in their journey. They felt a jolt, as if they'd gone over a little bridge when they were in this green mist, and the little bridge was mentioned by the researchers as well, and I just could not find it, and I drove up and down this road several times, but eventually, look, yes, there it is. I think this is the little bridge that's referenced in the account. And in fact, in the Flying Saucer Review, there's a picture here, the point of the road which Elaine first remembers after entering the Green Mist, and it looks pretty much like a match to me, which would probably put Elaine regaining consciousness a little bit further down the road here. The part about John wanting to get home in time to watch a play was actually brought out whilst John was under hypnosis, and it can be backed up by having a look at the TV listings for that day, 27th of October 1974, and at 10:20 on BBC One, there was a programme called Omnibus, which UK people will be familiar with, and this episode in particular was a profile of Joseph Conrad, a writer, on the 50th anniversary of his death. So that might well have involved some sort of a play being shown. However, if you look at BBC Two, at 10:20 there's something called Play. The girls in their summer dresses, starring Anne Bell and Anton Rogers. The report later mentions that it was in fact the girls in their summer dresses that John wanted to get back and see. Now, it wasn't until 1977 that John and Elaine actually spoke to a local UFO group after an article concerning UFOs had appeared in a newspaper called the Thurrock Express, which actually was authored by Andrew Collins, who happens to also be the author of this extremely comprehensive report in the Flying Saucer Review. And in the days following the event, the couple felt a number of changes in their own personal lives had taken place. For example, Elaine felt her self-confidence had grown, and she began to attend college, which is something that she'd wanted to do for a long, long time. John and Elaine both say that they became vegetarian after the event and had a greater concern for conservation and the future of our environment. They turned from people who, it sounds like, enjoyed a good drink into people who only really drank on a very special occasion. John stopped smoking completely, and Kevin, who had difficulties with his reading at school, suddenly started to improve and became way ahead of everybody else his age. But these seemingly beneficial changes were somewhat outbalanced by some rather odd things happening. John and Elaine recalled that they were being followed constantly by the same 3 cars. One was a red sports car, one was a blue Jaguar, and the other one was a big white car, and they all had dark windows, and they thought it was probably the police. And this lasted well into the summer of 1975. One night, in 1975 again, they heard 2 men talking very loudly in a white car outside their house. This went on for a couple of hours, and the family just got fed up of it, so John phoned the police, and he hadn't yet given his name and address, but 5 minutes later there came a knock at the door, and John could see that somebody was looking through his letterbox. John opened the door to find a short, stocky man who said he was a policeman, and that he had come to talk to John about the phone call, which astounded John, obviously. He pointed to the car, which was still parked across the road, and the policeman just left. Odd things happened inside the house as well. Items would disappear from rooms without a trace, and they'd just turn up later in another room. Elaine one day was on the phone to her sister-in-law, and the back door just burst open. On several occasions, both John and Elaine heard a humming noise from outside the house. It seemed to mostly be heard after midnight, usually after they've gone to bed. It seemed to begin like the sound of a sort of aeroplane in the distance, and then it got louder and louder until it's very, very loud, and then it moves over the top of their home and seems to move across to the other side of the house. On each occasion, it then just stops. There's no fade out, no suggestion that it's an object passing into the distance. It just stops. The family noticed a strange clicking sound began to happen around the house, just randomly every now and then. And John eventually got fed up of that and decided to try and track where the clicking was coming from. And every time he approached what he thought was the direction of the noise, it would move to a different part of the house. On Wednesday the 13th of December 1977, in the evening when the whole family were watching TV together, the handle of the door leading to the hall turned, and then it just shot back up to its original position. The strangest thing is that one night in the years following the event, Kevin claimed that he saw a man standing by the side of his bed, dressed like a clown. Other things also happened, so the family cat would hiss at unseen things in the living room, the telephone would act oddly and it would ring and there would be nobody there. John was getting stopped by the police when he was driving and asked to show his documents several times a week. For a couple of months, John would get tickets which were called 5-day wonder notes, which says the driver has to produce all the documentation to the nearest police station within 5 days, so a producer, as it were. John would dutifully do so, only for the policeman manning the desk to ask, "Where on earth have you got this from? It has not been issued by us." And this isn't the first strange thing that's happened to the family. In fact, about 13 years prior to this, John and Elaine were still courting, as they called it back then, and they'd gone on holiday, and they were casually strolling through the seafront, and then, over across the ocean, they saw a strange, flat object that looked a bit like a star, and it was behaving very erratically, bobbing around and darting across the sky. And then in 1968, John was returning home from some work he'd been doing in Birmingham, and he was on the M1 motorway. He doesn't remember exactly where, but it was somewhere nearer to London than it was to Birmingham. And then everybody in the car noticed a large bluish-white light coming towards them. Next thing they know, the lights on the cars in front began acting up, and it began to slow down, and everyone thought that it had broken down. And then John hit the car, which caused that one to hit another car in front of it, because the engines of all those vehicles had also cut out. All the drivers got out of the cars and were talking together, and they all called the police. When the police arrived, the drivers explained what had happened, and the police told them they'd just had other reports of the same nature from elsewhere in that same area. And then on October the 7th, 1977, so this is 3 years after the green mist encounter, the entire family were travelling to Aveley to Walton-on-the-Naze, and whilst travelling along the A12 between a place called Gallows Corner and Brentwood, they saw a large bluish light travelling in a similar direction to their car, and the radio began to crackle, and the lights and the engine began to act oddly again, but this time the light disappeared in front of them. So what happened while they were in this mist? Well, speaking during an initial interview, the couple revealed fleeting but unsettling memories of peculiar dreams hinting at what might have occurred during those missing 3 hours. John described fragmented recollections of being operated on by what he called gnomes, or small, ugly-looking creatures. He also recalled a sensation of someone touching scars on his chest and performing tests. Meanwhile, Elaine shared a vivid dream where she lay flat on a wide table, unable to move or speak, with a small figure in a white coat standing nearby. Though these fragments were vague, they proved to be compelling enough to push the investigation forward. With these early details in hand, the case quickly drew the attention of experts in the field of regression and hypnosis. Charles Bowen of the Flying Saucer Review facilitated connections to a Dr. Bernard E. Finch, a medical practitioner and contributor to the publication, as well as Dr. Leonard Wilder, a dental surgeon and a veteran in hypnosis research. Wilder, known for his work on reincarnation, detailed in Lives to Remember of 1975, was an ideal fit for unlocking deeper memories. Plans for a hypnosis session were swiftly put in motion, with the first scheduled for September the 25th, 1977. Meanwhile, in a second interview, ahead of those hypnosis sessions, Elaine described a startlingly clear memory in which she saw herself, John, and their son Kevin standing near a blue car in a vast curved room. The walls were reinforced with girders and machinery stood to one side. Men in grey one-piece suits moved around the machinery, and Elaine remembered walking towards another room containing the table she had seen in her dream. Then she encountered a small, ugly figure. As Elaine sketched this scene, John, who had been silent up to that point, unexpectedly interjected, correcting her depiction of the figure's arms and legs. When pressed on how he could know such details, he confessed to recalling more of the encounter. John described being on an operating table, surrounded by tall beings, and even being shown around the location where he claimed he was told many things. John agreed to undergo hypnosis to uncover what had occurred, stating that he preferred to know the truth rather than remain in the dark. Elaine opted not to participate. She wanted to forget it completely. Concerned for their son Kevin's well-being, the couple decided not to involve him in any part of this. The first session took place on September the 25th, 1977, at the home of Dr. Finch, and though Dr. Wilder did not regress John during this session, it still yielded intriguing results. Under hypnosis, John described seeing a large, circular blue object covered in a membrane-like surface, with arms extending outward, resembling rocks. He also had an impression of a man in an Arabian headdress holding a circular red light, with hills or mountains in the background. The second session, on October the 2nd, allowed for a deeper exploration, with Dr. Wilder regressing John through several stages of his life, taking him back to a past life in the 1800s. Finally, John was brought to relive the events of 1974. This session began to illuminate the gaps in his memory, although the full picture would still remain elusive. In the regression, John said that the beings were tall, but they were peaceful, and they were clothed in just one-piece suits. He couldn't see if they had any hair because they wore hoods. Their skin was hollow-looking and, according to John, very transparent, and the eyes were pink. John suggested that they communicated with him telepathically. He describes being scanned with a big flat bear that was about 30 inches long and 10 inches wide, made of some sort of honeycombed material, and it vibrated as it passed over him. He said he was in a big room with no windows. He asked the beings where they were from, and they showed him some sort of a chart with strange lines and figures on it that was like a map, but not a conventional map. He said he only remembered the word Phobos, which is a moon of Mars. The taller beings seemed to be entirely unaware of the smaller, uglier beings that both John and Elaine had described. He seemed to think that they were some sort of servant or drone, potentially, with the larger beings not really taking any notice of it. It didn't use any language, it just sort of chirped and squeaked. They seemed to be covered in fur of some description, and the larger beings had arms and legs, but they didn't seem to join onto the body. And they said that they needed humans as hosts, and that they know how, and they are us. And when pressed on this "they are us" point, John said, they won't let me talk about it. He recalls after being in the mist that they came close to the woods, and the car juddered and became normal again. They were all very, very scared, and they got home very, very quickly. They couldn't believe their eyes when they were looking at the clock, so they phoned Tim, the talking clock, telephone number 123 back in the day. It was 1:30 in the morning, whereas it should only have been 10:30 p.m. In a follow-up session with John, he was asked to describe the being that was examining him and doing the tests. John said it didn't have a very nice face and didn't seem to have any hair. It had big eyes and had a mouth, but not like ours. He examined John and he operated the machine. John doesn't recall if they took samples from him. He was then asked again about the taller beings. They had no mouths, said John. No need. And then he added, or at least, no visible mouths. John was asked to describe the propulsion system, which he said was very complex, but the words he could remember were ion magnetics. They spun something and created vortexes as propulsion. Dr. Leonard asked John what was the purpose for their visit, and John quickly said there is no visit. They are here, always. They are here to observe and to lead. The abductors apparently said that genetic experimentation was a large part of the reason that they were here. Elaine did eventually contribute further and recalled that she had been restrained while having the examinations. She became afraid and started to struggle until one of the beings placed its fingers on her forehead and temples, instantly rendering her unconscious. Such manipulations of consciousness were not uncommon during the encounter. John blacked out early on when one of the beings touched his shoulder. Elaine, meanwhile, was distressed at being separated from her kids and refused food offered by the beings because she thought it might be drugged. In response, one of the entities produced a soothing, harp-like melody by moving its fingers in the air, calming her despite her anxiety. When she expressed concern for her children, the being cryptically assured her, "Your children are safe. You value them. We do not have children. We reproduce through you. You are our children." The examination complete, John and Elaine were shown more of the craft. They were directed to watch a screen that displayed a dizzying sequence of maps and diagrams and images, all far too rapid for them to consciously process. The couple was eventually returned to their care, where their two youngest children appeared undisturbed, sleeping in the back seat. However, their eldest child, Kevin, who had been awake when the family encountered this strange green mist, had his own unsettling experience on that craft. The parents had avoided subjecting Kevin to hypnosis, but noted his peculiar comment. "They gave me a lot of things to do for when I grow up, but I've forgotten them all." What are your thoughts on this one? You let me know in the comments section. Please hit the like button, it's the thumbs up button in the corner there, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and share this video with your friends and all that good YouTube stuff. Bye for now.